Starting in this crossroads together, let's take a look at the world of empire. I'm going to be giving this presentation at a pagan convention, which is going to be held in a hotel owned by a corporation who will be deriving profit from all of our presence. That hotel is going to be on some dirt. That dirt once had a people called the Ohlone, who hunted, gathered, and lived there until Spanish colonization and then American expansion drove them out. To get there, many of us are going to fly or drive. I'm going to fly. I'm going to fly in from Orlando, Florida, a land which was also first colonized by the Spanish and then later turned into private property by the United States government. The plane I flew in will be owned by a capitalist corporation. It will be powered by hyper-refined petroleum, which it will burn, spewing approximately 55 metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That atmosphere currently holds 400 metric tons of carbon dioxide per every 1 million metric tons of air. That number, 400 parts per million, is enough to ensure that the average temperature of the Earth will increase 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit from the average temperature of the world at the birth of capitalism, which was 250 years ago. Industrialized capitalism started in England around 1760. Before then, almost everything that humans used was made by humans with human effort, without the input of petroleum. So, in the early 1700s, any clothing you wore and any food you ate was made or grown completely without fossil fuels. The first coal-fired factories were built in cities, which were swollen with refugees from the surrounding areas. Those people had just lost all access to land and the means to support themselves because of some laws which were called the Enclosure Acts. No longer could they raise animals and plants from the earth with their own 2 feet firmly planted on the ground. Now, their only option was to stand on wood or stone factory floors for 14 hours a day, making things for other people. Now, humans are hard to control. Humans don't like working all day for someone else. They have to eat and piss and shit and rest. Many women bleed every moon. Sometimes they get pregnant and have to care for their children. But coal doesn't tire. Coal doesn't show up late to work after a night of drinking or fucking. Coal doesn't need a rest. Coal doesn't get menstrual cramps. Doesn't daydream about how life can be better. Coal also doesn't demand wages. Humans do. So, the great revolution of industrialization was the very slow replacement of human labor with black carbon labor from the earth. In the Americas, the people called black were also used to replace wage labor. In both cases, though, the rich tried to find a low-cost, easily managed, fully predictable means to gain wealth. Slaves revolt, though, and they kill their masters. Coal and oil will blacken the cities and skies with soot, but if you burn it through filters, that carbon becomes invisible. It escapes quietly into the atmosphere, warming the earth at such imperceptible rates that it could be ignored until recently. What could not be ignored, though, was the tendency of humans to revolt against their masters, be they slaves or peasants, workers or servants. Humans don't make very good machines. We're unpredictable. We tire easily. And anyway, we'd rather be creating art or eating than doing something monotonous for little pay. The same era, which saw the birth of industrialized capitalism, also saw the birth of all modern forms of government and control. The modern city-state, the nation-state, so-called democracy, representative government, prisons resembling factories, resembling schools, resembling prisons. It also saw the birth of the modern police and the political order under which we all now live. It saw the birth of the United States, a nation swelled by refugees from capitalist expansion in Europe. The United States expanded westward, pushing those poor ever onward toward the west coast, where the killed bison and the First Nations would follow them, fencing off land, building new cities, laying down first rail, then highways, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, back to the city that I'm going to be giving this presentation in, the city called San Jose. We're back at a crossroads. The path from which we came led here, but we're not much wiser yet. So, what is empire then? By empire, I mean America, but I also don't. By empire, I mean capitalism, but I also don't. By empire, I mean colonization. I mean industrialization. I mean the slaughter of indigenous peoples and the enslavement of Africans. I mean all of that carbon in the air and all of the workers in the factory. I mean the dead bison of this land and the dying forests. I mean the computer on which I used to make this presentation. By empire, I mean the foreign wars. I mean an Arab woman cradling the corpse of her decapitated daughter who is shaking her fist at a black guy from Los Angeles who is just hoping for some college money. By empire, I mean the intersection outside and the single white mother driving her disabled kid to a doctor's appointment over roads laid down by migrant workers who are about to get deported. By empire, I mean the civitas, I mean the polis, I mean civilization, and I mean the police, I mean the laws and logic, I mean the political order, the thou shalt nots, and the prisons where we go when we refuse to listen. But more than anything, I mean the empire in each of you, and I mean the empire in me. I mean all that was once wild and raw and sacred in each of us that is now ground down into machine parts and mechanical obedience. I mean the FBI, which is probably watching this. I mean the FBI and myself, measuring my words against the will of empire, watching for a slip, an accidental unveiling of my witchcraft behind the civilized, obedient veneer. By empire, I mean you. By empire, I mean me. And finally, by empire, I mean this thing that is crumbling around us, grasping for air, begging us to keep it alive. The empire that is crumbling around us was born on the factory floor and on the witch's stake, and both were assaults on the human body. Sylvia Federici said in her essay in praise of the dancing body, capitalism was born from the separation of people from the land, and its first task was to make work independent of the seasons and to lengthen the workday beyond the limits of our endurance. What we have not always seen is what that separation of the land and nature has meant for our body, which has been pauperized and stripped of the powers that pre-capitalist populations attributed to it. So, if the first task of capitalism was to separate us from land and nature, they have more than succeeded. One may only look at the vastly artificial surroundings we're in, witches and pagans all of us, celebrating our earth-based spirituality in oceans of concrete. But it's useless to rail against these surroundings. They are not assaults in an ongoing struggle against the connection to nature. That war was already won by them long ago. And we are now an occupied people, occupying occupied land cleared long before any of us were born. If that war was lost, though, the other war is still going. Says Federici again, mechanization, the turning of the body, male and female, into a machine, has been one of capitalism's most relentless pursuits. Capitalism has needed us to act like machines so we can fit into a system as mere, fully interchangeable cogs. Many of us don't fit, though, be it our bodies themselves or our failure to conform. The process of turning us into machines is never fully complete. Those of us who gum up the gears aren't welcome in the factory, but empire has a place for us too. Empire was born on the factory floor, and it was also born on the witch's stake. Failure to file down your rough bits, refusal to conform to the will of the political order, and, worst of all, encouraging others to do the same thing will land you, at best, in jail, or riddled with mental illnesses that did not exist in pre-capitalist times, or suffocated with a crushed trachea for daring to sell loose cigarettes on the sidewalk, or bleeding to death in the street for looking not white when the polis tried to enforce its will. There are countless technological institutions and distractions which have helped us forget our bodies. The masturbatory fantasies of video games and pornography, the medicalization of any bodily refusal to be a good worker. Gyms look like factories for a reason, because it's in the mills and on the mechanical looms where we first lost the meaning of muscle and blood. And then there's the clock time, our smartphones and alarm clocks, and schools, which taught us to move from class to class to prepare us to move from task to task. Capitalism needed to separate us from the land and our body because it is the land and the body which tells you that this is all wrong. The land screams as species go extinct, forests die, ice caps melt. Your body screams when you treat it as a machine. Your body tells you that this is all wrong. Starting from the body, you know you tire faster when you're doing meaningless work. You know the food on offer for you at the supermarkets is often empty. You know that the air that you breathe is often toxic. You know that sitting for 8 hours in front of a screen hurts more than just your eyes. You know that standing behind a counter, slinging coffee to exhausted people, makes you just a poorly paid drug dealer. All that knowledge is what capitalism needs you not to know. All those feelings are what empire fears that you'll feel. Capitalism needed to separate us from the land and our bodies for another reason. Your body is always in contact with something else, something outside of yourself. Your feet, the lowest part of you, the easiest part to ignore until they're hurt. They connect to the entire world soul. Taking your shoes off, standing on the grass or the sand or stone, you become no longer machine, but a body again, part of something always bigger than yourself, with a different logic, a more intuitive time, a deeper truth. Your feet on the earth, you cannot be disconnected from the earth and its seasons, because you are the earth and you are its seasons. Work in summer is not work in winter. The time of your waking and the cycles of your sleeping follow a different rhythm, fully separate from the time of money making, the time of machines. Capitalism needs you to forget this. Witchcraft tells you to remember. If empire was born on the factory floors and on the witch's stake, it spread into every last bit of our existence, making subjects out of each one of us. While capitalism needed to separate us from the land and our bodies, empire needed us to become passive subjects of the political order. Passivity is not receptivity. As a gay man, I can assure you, more action goes into receptive sex than merely closing your eyes and thinking of the empire. I suspect most women would concur. Receptivity opens us up to the world of senses, of feelings, of meaning. You're being receptive now, actually, taking my words into you, playing with them, weaving their meaning into a tapestry of you. But passivity, that makes you a victim, a mere tool in the hands of the powerful. Passivity is consumption, selection between lifestyle options, and identity defined by not what you do, but what you choose. Did you vote Democrat or Republican? Drink Coke or Pepsi? You use an iPhone or an Android? Passivity reduces will to mere consumer preference. No longer will to power, but a mere checkbox on a ballot or a selection on a screen. No longer desire and suffering, but mere distractions to dull the fatigue of work and the anxiety of alienation. You can't force someone to become a passive subject, except by long applications of torture. But there's another route, a slower one, by which you can conquer the will of others, by telling them not, thou shalt not, but you can't. You cannot survive without capitalism. You cannot be safe without police. You cannot find meaning outside of wage labor. You cannot find love without cosmetics. What we did not lose on the factory floor, we lost with the death of witches. Not only the women with herbs and poison roots, not only the crones bearing stories from times before private property, not only the maidens who were urging us to worship in temples of wild lust, not only the mothers who fed us from their own bodies, not only them, but also them, those women who reminded us that an entire world can be made not from city and machine, but from forest and dirt. Not only them, but also the heretics, the mad, the dreamers, the rebels, the men who dress like women, tearing down fences along with women who dress like men, refusing the enclosure of the sacred commons and the seizure of land for the profit of the few. The indigenous elders who were gunned down by settlers, the traditional healers who died in the hulls of slave ships, all of them taught what empire needs us to forget: that the earth knows what the computer never will, that the body bleeds a liquid more explosive than petroleum. With them gone, we started to believe that we cannot. We cannot heal ourselves without pharmaceuticals. We cannot feed ourselves without factory farms. We cannot make our own clothes. We cannot craft our own homes. Now we must suckle at the toxic teat of the market while it slaps us repeatedly with an invisible hand. We also forgot that we can resist. But in the screaming defiance of the burning witches was a reminder: we can refuse to submit, even into death. It took centuries to shape us into what we are now, passive, sniveling subjects of empire and capital. Though this may seem like a long time, it isn't. We've lived outside of empire much longer. Capitalism is new and it's short-lived compared even to feudalism. It differs only in its full permeation of all of our existence, and that's the reason why I call it empire. It's also crumbling. Empires crumble, and this one's falling fast. The climate change caused by capitalism can't be stopped any longer, and its effects already cause famines and resource wars throughout the world. Between 30,000 and 140,000 species go extinct every year. At the beginning of the 1800s, this number was no more than 1,000 yearly. Cities are beginning to flood, water tables are depleting, while the oil wells which make the entire empire run are going dry. Climate change will increase the refugee crisis currently facing the nationalist parties in Europe and the US, and whether they are fleeing from rescue wars or unmanned drone bombers, they are undoubtedly the first quakes of empire's impending collapse. Empires have always pompously declared themselves eternal. The British swore the sun would never set on them. The Third Reich was supposed to last 1,000 years. Western democratic capitalist empire, what we're in now, declared itself the, quote, end of history in the 90s. But of course, Fukuyama's prediction sealed its fate. Empires have always tried to cheat death, and this one is no different. But the crone that stands on the other side of death's door revealed her trump card, and now few of us can deny what this means. I know some still cling to the vain hope that Donald Trump is merely an unfortunate setback to the progress of civilization. But reversing civil protections, installing fascist theorists into positions of power, rattling the chains of other world leaders, building a wall to keep the Mexicans out, these are not mere reversals of empire. They are empire trying to save itself. Consider that wall between US and Mexico. See past the very obvious racism of such a thing and its absurd cost to what's lurking beneath the political veneer. Consider the impending flood of climate refugees. Remember your geography. Look at a map displaying where the major destruction will occur first, and suddenly, Trump's idea doesn't just sound like xenophobic delusion. All of that increase in surveillance powers, the militarization of police forces, the dismantling of the courts and the rights that they are sworn to protect, the stoking of fascist flames, these are not the actions of a psychopath, but of an engineer who's trying to shore up the ruins of empire. The rise of far-right nationalism in the United States and Europe is happening for the exact same reasons. Marxists have a saying that fascism is liberal democracy's shadow. When the money stops flowing, when people start demanding more rights and wealth than an empire can provide, when it becomes harder to govern under the guise of imperial peace, harder to hide the destruction and exploitation that comes along with capitalism, then liberal democracy summons its evil twin to clean house. Brexit in the United Kingdom, Trump in the US, Le Pen in France, Pegida and Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, the Golden Dawn in Greece, these are not illnesses that are sweeping empire, but the only medicine that might be able to save it. I have no doubt many of you voted for Hillary Clinton. You're probably quite sore about her loss. This makes me no friends, but I'm not here for friends anyway. She could not have stopped this, only prolonged the pain. No elected leader can, nor should they, bring back the false innocence under which we lived our lives, pretending we could go on forever with all of our wars and our oil, our hyper-consumerism, and our drugged-out optimism. The Marxist Jewish mystic philosopher Walter Benjamin, writing about the angel of history, gave us the only path out of this crossroads. He wrote, "This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned toward the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into a future towards which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows ever skyward. This storm is what we call progress."